Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome to the Milton Warrant Committee. I'm your chair, Tom Caldwell, and we're kicking off our budget year tonight for the committee. And as you can see, I had posted an agenda on the town website, so we actually have a couple of guests here with us today to speak just regarding some of the preliminary budgetary discussions that have been going on over the summer in the town, and specifically some of the information that's been presented to the select board regarding some of our finances coming up for the year. I know that many of you have maybe seen discussions concerning obviously a new school project, a potential override, maybe not an override. So I figured I just had the feeling as chair that we would, begin those discussions. And but I think more importantly, to start off, Mr. Milano is going to kind of go over last year's warrants in a limited fashion for some of our new members. Just kind of set forward just how, from the town administrator and the town accountant, how they begin to structure the budget, what's going through their minds, where they're pulling numbers from, and things like that, just to familiarize yourself with the process. I know there are some people who are town meeting members here, have been long-time town meeting members, some people who have not, others who have served in various committees. So some of these things may be familiar to you, some things may not, but I know with explanations that Mr. Milano and Ms. Dexter always gives us regarding the budget, and also your fellow Warrant Committee members. You can obviously talk to them if there are questions about it, and obviously talk to me, Steve, if you have any questions on why a number is where it is, or why do we fund this committee or board that way, so we can all have a discussion about it. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this year. We have a lot to tackle, and we have a great committee with a lot of new members. So I think it's going to be a very good year. There's just a few things before we get into Mr. Milano's presentation and any discussion. I just wanted to kind of go through some meeting procedure things. I know this is kind of old for some of our returning members, but I'd like to kind of keep things very similar to how we've been doing them for the past several years. And I think the big thing is, as you can see in the agenda, and some of you may have not seen an agenda before, but I think, moving forward this year, I'm going to, obviously we'll have certain things we're going to talk about, but then obviously there'll be time for questions and discussions. And just in terms of the committee itself, just as the chair, when we have open discussion and questions, I just ask that you ask me to be recognized. I'll recognize you, and then you can begin to, make your comment or ask your questions of the speaker. During the course of the meeting, please just address me. I don't want to disturb a good back and forth between a guest speaker and a member, but I just want to caution the group that sometimes we talk about some passionate things here and people feel strongly about things. I just don't want it to become a back and forth argument or a one-up thing, which I don't think would happen, but on some of the matters a couple of years ago we discussed, it kind of got like that. So we just like to avoid it. So please address your comments to me, if you can, the best way you can, and I think that'll be a good way to proceed. In terms of keeping track, if you have multiple hands up, I'll have Steve and I'll have Karen to assist us. But before we get started, I forgot, and I'm sorry, I'm just new with this. We've called the meeting to order, but we should probably do a attendance call first. So Karen, could you read through the roll and
I will.
Attendance?
Tom Caldwell.
Here?
Yeah, I'm going to call the names because I don't know who everyone is, so I just thought I'd have you say here this time. Steve Rhines.
Here.
Lori Conley.
Yes, here.
Elizabeth Dillon.
I am here.
Jay Funling.
Here.
Allison Gagnon.
Here.
Julie Joyce. Did we have Julie? Andrew Coe.
Here.
Macy Lee.
Here.
Julia Maxwell. Peter Mon.
Here.
Brian McGuire.
Here.
Aman Nagasi,
Present.
Ron Sia,
Here.
and Judy Steele.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll make sure we start the meetings off with that in the future. My apologies. That's just in terms of just how we exchange the information on the committee, just in terms of procedure. As I indicated, the agendas will be posted. We're going to stick to these agendas, obviously. We don't want to violate any open meeting laws. So what's on the agenda is what we discuss. If there is something on the agenda that you would like to be placed on the agenda, some work that you've done or information that you'd like to share with the committee, feel free to email me, call me, forward me the materials that you want to discuss with the group. We'll discuss it, and then we can present it at the meeting. So I think, especially for some of our new members, we're going to hear from Nick, and there's a host of materials concerning the budget online on the town website. But just for the committee itself, you're going to be receiving a lot of materials, budgets, requests. I'm sure that there'll be some other things that we'll be discussing at the meeting. But a lot of the committee is really kind of doing their own work. So it's really, either picking issues or issues. It's your responsibility to stay apprised of everything, to watch the meetings. I really hope, and it's hard to do, I know, but take some time to especially watch like the select board meetings, planning board. There's just a wealth of information in those meetings, and you can really see what the hot button issues are, and I find them very helpful. Milton Access TV is great, as I mentioned in the last meeting, in the town website. So this is really what you kind of bring to the table. And Jay's podcast. Jay also has a podcast. I know we discussed it, Jay.
Yeah, a podcast. The name of the podcast is not very creative. It's Milton, Massachusetts Public Meetings. I don't give an opinion or anything. All I do is grab the audio from the Milton Access TV recording and stick it on the podcast. So if you want to listen to a meeting while walking your dog or doing dishes, you can do that. I sometimes fall behind on posting meetings, so don't be shy about reaching out to me and saying, Jay, I want to listen to that planning board meeting from last week. Can you post it? Because in my imagination, nobody's listening to this but me. So if I know you're listening to it, I'll be more prompt.
Yeah. So just to dovetail on that, I've listened to Jay's podcast, just the meetings, like I said, just walking around mowing the lawn. I just find it helpful, but that's really where I find, you can read, but the hot button issues of the day are going on in the meetings.
No, I was going to agree, because I did listen to the last meeting part of it, like the select board, because that's when you mentioned the new school project, because I think Richard Wells was like talking about, like there was a little girl that was like coming in and talk about Tucker, and how they're trying to like create like more like school like space for the classroom. So yeah, important stuff that I'd recommend.
And also, if feel free, if there are any questions that you have, please reach out to me. And you can reach out via cell phone. I'm going to pass a list around at the end of the meeting. I got some of your cell phone numbers from the moderator. I'd like to maybe fill out a list. I'd like to perhaps, and we can discuss this at a future meeting, maybe get a text thread together. No discussions about issues in the text thread. It's more like an alert to emails, meetings, agendas, or materials. Some of you, I sent some emails too. I don't encourage a lot of back and forth on the emails. Our emails are subject to a public record request. They have been requested in the past, and that's fine. But make sure whatever you're putting in email, you're comfortable with the general public reading. And like I said, the phone works. I'm very good with the phone, and as are most people in the group. So I think that'll be very helpful. Another, if you see on the agenda that we're having a speaker like Mr. Milano and Amy's here, Jay had some questions. Jay's been on the committee a couple of years. Jay emailed them to Mr. Milano. So, you need not always do that. I know sometimes questions, you just come up as you're sitting here. But if you do have some very pointed questions where you're looking for specific information, or you know, it's a heavy question. You know, I'd ask that you maybe reach out to the committee or the person who's speaking, whether it be the chief of police, Mr. Milano, head of public works, and as the member of the committee, feel free to contact the various heads of, you know, whatever board or anything. Mr. Milano will take your emails. Amy Dexter, the town accountant, will take your emails. You know, we're the Warrant Committee, so we're asking them to produce information, and according to the bylaws, they need to provide that information as we make the budgetary decisions. So, and you're gonna get good feedback. So in terms of emails, and they're all on the website. In a future meeting, we're gonna be talking about committee assignments and having certain members go out and speak to the individual heads of various committees and boards and report back. So, you know, you're going to be in touch with these people and meeting with them. So, you know, don't feel funny. You're not bugging anybody. It's part of their job, and they're expected to receive emails from you. So that's really that. Presentations. I mentioned presentations. Did I? Okay, just to expand on it a little more, if you have a presentation you want to do in front of the committee, I encourage it. If you could just send it to me about like 72 hours in advance, I'd like to put it on the agenda, okay? I like to tell people that so-and-so is talking about the cemetery, or so-and-so is talking about the schools. And I need 48 hours in advance. So that 72 kind of gives me a chance to look at it, discuss it with you, make a plan about it, and then obviously get it to Karen and the town so we can have it on the agenda. So if you could please just extend that courtesy, that would be great. Lori.
Will they be distributed put on the public, on our website so that the public can actually access the presentation? Because it's like we're discussing it in an open meeting. So is that something that, like,
It's something we can do.
just thinking like ADA?
Yeah, that's something we can do. I can discuss that with Rob Mallett. You know, Jay has presented to us in PowerPoint format and others in the past. So I think maybe anything, I know coming from the committee, maybe should be on the website.
I'll address this to you, Mr. Chair, because I
Sure.
want to do it back and forth. I'm just wondering if the member to my left, are you saying you want it to be before the meeting public, or just after the meeting, or?
Well, actually, personally, for me, if you were having a presentation, when you put them up on the screen, like, I would like to have it in front of me,
Okay.
because, you know, I like to take notes.
Yes.
So that would include me
So
distributing.
that would, if you distribute it
Not a
to
problem.
the members, so we can have it ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just like to bring my paper with me.
I had worried in the past, I don't want to email everyone because I worry am I violating open meeting laws if I'm sending somebody a presentation with my opinions on it. I don't know, so that's why I'll send it to you or to Karen. But then obviously if it's not only sent to everyone on this meeting, in this table, but put it on a website, then that's not a violation. I don't know. That's why you're the chair.
Yeah, exactly, Jay. I don't, it's an excellent question just concerning the distribution to the group. I'm going to talk to town council. I feel as if though that's not a violation. There's no discussion. Maybe we can talk to Mr. Milano about that when he comes up. He might have something to add.
Okay.
Okay. And I just think that if people have it in advance, you know, they're going to be better prepared for the meeting. You know, this is something difficult for me to ask because I've done it myself. But especially when we have people here, we have people coming in. You know, just in terms of the quorum. A quorum is 8. I would like people to do their best efforts. We have a Zoom option, but just to be here out of respect for the speaker, but also bring some questions. Come well armed for these, and I know many of you do. Just for the, you know, especially for the new members, I try to think of like 3 things. Oftentimes, all 3 are answered. Sometimes in the presentation, or by other members asking the question. So, I just add that we utilize our speakers the best we can while we have them in the room, and we can, ask as many questions as possible for our benefit and the benefit of the public. Okay, I'm thinking, I mentioned this last meeting, I'm thinking Monday, Wednesdays, potential meetings. I'd like to try to keep them shorter than they have been in the past, maybe do more meetings with kind of a shorter agenda. We had a lot of meetings where they were 4 or 5 hours long. I get it, it's at the end, we're approaching the budget, and there's a lot of things to talk about, but I'm going to try to make the best use of our time. A lot of just quick meetings. I'll be focusing on Mondays and Wednesdays, and we'll add, obviously, as the town meetings come up. So I don't know. That's really all I kind of have. And I'll take any questions that you have.
How much notice is there for meetings usually?
I'm going to try working with Steve to plan out a meeting schedule for us. A lot of it, I think, is going to be based on the next couple of meetings we have and our discussions. But I'd like to set forward, have a schedule, just so we know, instead of popping these things up every once in a while. Also, another reason why I want that text thread, just to remind people, check your email. So I can't, the latest, like for a Monday meeting, I have to post by Thursday, excuse me. So, but I'm going to try to work it out so we all kind of have a good idea of when we're meeting. And it's not just kind of all over the place.
You said that we got like a town email. I never logged into it because I don't know where I approach it. I mean, I got the trainings done.
Okay.
For some of you, appreciate it. But I am not sure how it works, like how we were sent. Were we sent to like our regular, like say Gmail to?
Nothing was sent out that I'm aware of.
Contact IT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was mentioned before the meeting started. So and there was just a mistake. Everyone has been assigned an email, and the emails have been going out, but it's under the town of Milton. Not everybody has the emails, which I've now discovered was the case. Not everybody has signed up. You need to talk to Rob Mallett here at Town Hall. He's the head of the IT department.
Rob who?
Mallett,
Mallet.
ET.
Gotcha.
617-898.
617.
898.
Yep.
898-4938.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the last 49 what?
38.
Okay, thank you.
I only know this because I called today.
There you go.
Rob will be very responsive to you. He'll get back to you very quickly, and he'll get it set up. So in terms of that, just in general, just try to check your email a couple of times a week
Yeah, definitely.
when that is finally set up.
The only reason I ask is because I know when it comes to sometimes the last time we had this meeting was like a month ago, like a little over a month ago, and sometimes we're all busy. We might forget things, and we might need those refreshers. I was kind of curious, like I was proposing this idea about whether we can kind of keep up with, like, say, a Teams. I don't know if that works. I don't know how the information is open or closed.
Yeah, well, it's open meeting, so like you mean like a Teams meeting?
If we use like Teams, like, because usually, so what I know is like the Air Force, what they do is that they kind of have like a Teams, like they have like general like folders, like people can chat, everything, messages, and it's kind of easier for people to like keep in touch or like,
Well, yeah, so that would probably violate our open meeting law.
Okay.
So we have kind of like little pockets. So I think to address that, we meet in person, and it's obviously why like the conversation.
oh, we would still
over
meet in
email.
person. It was just like when it comes to how the information is like secured and pretty much like we can kind of see like the agenda, and instead of just also like just relying on notes, we could still take notes, but we would also still like have like information there, and it's like secure.
Maybe we can talk after the meeting.
Okay, sure.
Really, in terms of maybe a new proposal or something that you have.
Okay, sure.
I just want to keep it moving along. Does anybody have any other questions just about just the general procedures of the meetings and just how we are moving forward?
The only thing I'd add is be prepared to give a password, complex password to Rob when you talk to him. 12 characters or more. You can't self-service password reset. Only they can do that the way they've set up the environment. So just be aware. Thanks.
He's really helpful.
Yeah, he is. He
Super
really is.
He's fantastic.
Okay. Everyone, and if there's any other questions about little stuff, feel free, just reach right out to me.
We have a hand up from Judy, Mr. Chair.
Oh, we have a hand up. Judy, you're recognized.
I just wanted to make a mention, it doesn't have to, the password the gentleman was talking about, doesn't have to be that complex. I'm actually looking at the post-it note on my computer now, when I brought it down to get redone, because I couldn't reset my password myself. And it's really very simple. Anyone could crack it, passcode. Just has to have like one of the symbols and a number and a capital letter. So some of our banks have more complex. So you don't have to go all out thinking up a password. Just a comment, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no hands raised, I'm going to invite Mr. Milano, our town administrator, to come forward. And he has a presentation for us.
Amy's here as well, but I'll let her.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, and good to see some new faces. Appreciate the opportunity. So I will, I have a bit of a presentation here just to kind of give everybody an update on what's going on in terms of fall town meeting, what's going on with the budget, what is the budget process, how do things look. And then lastly, I do have some information on school projects, just as that is obviously something that may come up in the spring, so I can give a little background on that. Happy to take questions as we go, so feel free to jump in. And for members who have been on the Warrant Committee, you've probably seen some of this before, but I'll go through it all just for the benefit of some of the newer members. So I already touched on that one. Fall town meeting, so we do not yet have a scheduled fall town meeting. In our bylaws, I think it says if required, we have one. The recent ones, the past few years, except for 21, have been held in December, usually that first Monday in December. I think that's the next logical date we would look at if a fall town meeting is scheduled. Part of the reason that one hasn't been locked in is we don't yet have any warrant articles submitted to the select board. We don't have anything that we're working on. The planning board doesn't have anything that they would be ready for at that time frame. The school building committee, as some of you may have seen, has been talking about potentially submitting a warrant article for additional funding to support that project. They're meeting tonight, I believe, so there may be more news after tonight's meeting, but that's one kind of potentially out there. So as if we get anything, we'll obviously let Tom know and share that with the warrant committee. But as of right now, the select board has not yet scheduled a fall, winter, however you want to term it, town meeting. The presidential election is November 5th. That always makes scheduling a town meeting around then pretty challenging. Our town clerk staff will be all out from now until then, unfortunately. So they'll be very busy. So we like to try to give them some breathing room around the presidential election. And early voting is up right now, in case anybody wants to come back to town hall to vote. I just wanted to share some resources for municipal finance information, and I'll get this presentation online and shared, so these links you can go to. First, our offices were open. I'm available. Amy's available. Treasurer Joanna McCarthy's around. Feel free to stop in, shoot us an email with questions. We're happy to respond and share that information, especially as you're trying to get acclimated to the budget process and what goes on. I believe the Mass Association Town Finance Committee's handbook was, parts of it I think were distributed, so you might have access to that. The Massachusetts Division of Local Services, which is the agency the finance departments most closely work with, has a ton of information online. They have a finance training and resources center. They have a bunch of YouTube series. They're short videos, a couple minutes each, that go into much more detail around municipal finance matters, whether it's related to debt exclusions like the school project we might be talking about, whether it's related to overrides or just budgeting in general. So there's a lot of tools out there. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go on and explore and learn how you like to. If you'd rather sit with me and talk about things, or sit with Amy and talk about things, do that. If you'd rather just watch a bunch of YouTube videos, you're very welcome to do that as well. In terms of the budget process, so we are kind of at the forefront of, at the beginning stages of that now. So we have requested that town departments submit their budgets to the finance director, to Amy, by the end of this month. After that, we will typically sit down with the department heads to review their budget and their requests. After that point, we'll wrap up those budget requests and submit them to the warrant committee. Our goal is to have those to the warrant committee by December 1st, before December 1st. So I think you can expect to see those before December 1st. And we hope to have those in pretty decent shape by then. And what those requests will have is, what is a level service budget for your department? What keeps the same amount of staffing? What funds the same amount of needs as you have currently in this fiscal year? What we've also asked all departments to do is submit additional requests. If you were to receive additional funding, what would you want it to go to? What kind of long-term goals do you have for your department? How can you improve services, and what kind of funding would you need to do that? So it's kind of a dual process. What keeps everything moving and ticking over for another fiscal year if we had to do that? If we could invest in your department, where do you want us to invest into? And so we review those requests with everybody, and then we'll share those with the warrant committee. And I know Tom was talking about this in terms of subcommittees and everything else, but the sooner you folks start to meet with department heads, it makes everybody's life easier. You can wait until March if you want, but it makes a lot of work at the end. Once we submit those budgets and get them to you, feel free to reach out and start coordinating meetings. Those can happen in the fall. We don't have to wait until the spring. The other thing that should be back in all of your minds is the warrant committee submits the comments that go in the annual town meeting warrant. So having that work done early will help making that comment writing process faster when we get to getting the warrant ready for town meeting in the spring. So anyway, that's what's going on in the near future. The school department moves on a slightly different schedule. Their budget is typically more or less final towards the end of January, when they have a public hearing on their budget. But in terms of the town departments, we'll have those ready in the next couple of months for you. That's really it on process and schedule. So I'll dive into some of the numbers now, if everybody's okay with that. So what I've done here is just kind of talk through some of our revenue categories, talk about what sources of revenue we do have, what can change, and then add a little bit about expenditures. It's still a little early for that, and then some financial indicators about the town. So big picture, property taxes obviously make up most of our revenues, about 75%. State aid makes up the next at about 13%. And then local receipts, which is additional income generated locally, is 7%. And then in fiscal 24, anyway, for which this year is shown, we had other funds at around 4%. So the bulk of it is the property taxes, local receipts, and state aid. This is a little bit of a complicated chart, but it just shows what our calculation is on the property tax side. So if you see in fiscal 24, the prior year levy limit was $91,940,000. Every year, we can increase the levy limit that we raise on all taxpayers by 2.5%. And then we add in any new growth. I'll talk a little bit more about new growth in a bit, but think about it as construction and renovation projects. That gets us to a levy of about $95 million. below the line there is debt exclusion revenue. So these are taxes that residents are paying and business owners are paying to specific projects. The debt exclusion line that you see there in fiscal 24 for 1.8 million, that is the school projects from the early 2000s, the library project as well. The next line is for the fire station projects that are ongoing now. And then there is an additional override for medical expenses for a firefighter who was injured in the line of duty. So you add all that together and our overall levy is about $100 million. So every year, what can change in terms of property taxes? What we can increase is the 2.5% levy, and then we're also getting additional new income from new growth. Everything else is pretty much set in stone unless you have an override. The override is a way to increase the levy that we put on all residents. So really, we're looking at about a 3% to 3.5% increase year over year in property taxes that can go into the budget without an override. That's taking in the 2.5% and then the new growth. And then to think about, what would an override cost us? Luckily, our levy is about $100 million, so it's pretty easy. So if a $5 million override would be about a 5% increase on taxes. So it makes some of the math, at least back of the envelope math easier. In terms of the property tax levy, everybody knows residential community, 93% of the taxes paid in Milton on property taxes come from residential taxpayers. And then on the right-hand side shows how that's broken out among the various residential taxpayers. 87% is coming from single-family homeowners, 2 families, and all other residential uses of the balance. So predominantly residential taxpayers, and then predominantly of those single-family homeowners. This just shows what the town's average single-family tax bill has done. This is a metric cities and towns usually use when comparing to each other and thinking about what the burden has been on residents. Graph on the left and then numbers on the right. The 2 orange bars and then the red writing are our most recent overrides. As you can see, in 2010 it jumped 11.5%, and then in 2018 it went up. The levy went up about 7.5%. The rest of the time we're looking at about a 3%, 3.5% levy increase year over year, and the town has not had an operating override since 2018, and we've been pretty consistent on, funding level service budget plus some additional needs within those limitations. I talked a bit about new growth. So this is the dollar increase on new construction renovations. It doesn't mean I own a cape and my cape went up $20,000. That's not new growth. It's you did something to increase your home's value. A kitchen renovation addition, for example, would be new growth, as would new construction. In recent years, some of the new growth that's driving our higher than historical numbers is the construction over on Walcott Woods on Canton Ave, 131 Elliott Street, which is the multifamily apartment building right on Elliott and Central Ave. And we expect new growth to stay pretty consistent in the future years. Right now we have an estimate of about $850,000 in fiscal 26 budget, but we're hopeful that will be conservative. There are additional projects ongoing now on the Parkway. There's a residential project going in now on Blue Hills Parkway. 711 Randolph Ave, which is a 40B project, is being constructed. 440 Granite Ave, which is another multifamily building, is under construction as well. So these projects, we start getting revenue from them once they break ground, and we'll continue to do that as they progress and come online. So that's helping us be a little bit higher than our historical norm, and we hope that will continue. State aid, as I mentioned, is one of the other larger buckets of revenue we bring in. When thinking about state aid, it's really 2 things. Education aid, also referred to as Chapter 70, and then unrestricted general government aid. The acronym there is UGA, so I'll probably not use that acronym. That's about $4 million. There's a lot of state-owned land in Milton. That generates about $1.5 million. So these sources go to the town's general fund and contribute to the town's budget year over year. We also pay assessments to the state. That's for county government, Norfolk County. MBTA is the big assessment. Our retired teachers don't get their health insurance through the town, they get it through the state retirement system, so there's an assessment for that. and it all nets out. So we gain about $12 million in net state aid each year. This has been one where we've had some interesting recent experience where it's been, as you can see in 23 and 24, 10% increase and an 8.9% increase, in state aid. And this is in Chapter 70 education aid. That makes a huge difference. We're talking almost $1 million in 1 year of increase. We had planned in our initial forecast last year when we were doing this to have a similar increase, and then that didn't come through. And so it had us kind of back on our heels a bit and reevaluating some of our assumptions. So for fiscal 26, you'll see there at the bottom, we're assuming a 1% increase just to keep that conservative. The state has been pushing a lot more money into education aid. Milton has been a beneficiary of that, as well as to some changes to the Chapter 70 formula that determines how money flows to cities and towns. So we had some benefits from that. In 25, the state dialed back some of its aid, so Milton got less. So we're trying to budget conservatively on that. This number won't really change as we go through the budget process until January. The governor will release her budget in the January time period, and that's when we'll have fresh numbers to update. But I think for the time being, you can expect us to remain pretty conservative about education aid. Unrestricted general government aid is similar. It's been between 3%, 5%, depending on the year. We have it at a 2% increase in 26 for our estimates. Local receipts is another category. This is revenue, like I said, that is generated locally. The biggest category is motor vehicle excise tax, which we collect. Regulatory fines, trash fees is another one that the trash fees pay for the town's solid waste program. It doesn't pay for it 100%, but it funds a major portion of the town's trash program. Payments in lieu of taxes are the payments that Curry College, Milton Academy, and I'm missing a couple, Mary B. Wakefield Trust, and somebody else.
The hospital.
And the hospital does not pay into pilot. So those are the three major payers. So we get about, this year we got $245,000 from Milton Academy, $110,000 from Curry College, and then a small contribution from a small trust here in town. So those fall under the local receipts category.
Sorry,
no, please.
Does Delphi Academy fall under too?
They're not paying taxes, but they also don't make a contribution to the town either, so they're not paying into it. And those smaller institutes don't necessarily usually pay into. It's just the two large ones that do currently.
Are those mandatory, the pilot?
They're 100% voluntary. They don't owe the town anything for their property values. They don't have to make a contribution. They do. Curry's been at the same number for a few years, but it's more than any small college, I think, that I've looked at. Milton Academy has increased $10,000 to $15,000 a year over the past several years.
Is that like a law that they're exempt?
Yes, those are educational institutions, so they're exempt from local property taxes. Charities, so the hospital falls under the charitable exemption. I will note the Milton Hospital has medical offices, and those are taxed, but the core business of the hospital is not. Investment income is a little bit of a misnomer. This is income generated on the town's monies. It's not like we're investing it. They're just in bank accounts earning interest rates. So local receipts, again, go into the general fund. This is a place where, again, we've experienced some strong growth in recent years, and I'll show a little bit more about why that is. One of the things that happened with the COVID budget impacts is communities dialed back their forecasts on local receipts, expecting economic activity to really slow down. And except for that initial shutdown, it really didn't. So for the last few years, cities and towns across Massachusetts, their local receipts forecasts have been really conservative, and the actuals are coming in really strong. So that is something that happened here in Milton as well, but we've dialed those forecasts back up and estimates back up. So we're not as conservative as we have been, kind of acknowledging that some of the slower economic activity that we expected never really materialized. One of the ones that's a little bit of an outlier is investment income. As I mentioned, this is income on the town's bank balances. As you can see, this has been something that bounces around until 23 and 24. We were less than $100,000. $322,000 in fiscal 20. But the year that just closed, fiscal 24, we brought in $1.6 million in investment income and had estimated $400,000. So that's money that'll close out to free cash, which I'll talk about in a bit. But that 1.2 million overestimate wasn't spent by the town. It closes out and is available to be appropriated in the future.
So that means if you earn like 5%,
Great.
you have like 25 million
Yeah.
average.
And the money will come and go and be used during different times of the year. Our cash flow is stronger than others, so the earnings will fluctuate over time as well.
Sorry, microphone. Is there any, and this is an open-ended question, I don't expect you to have an answer, but so we earn more on that when short-term interest rates are high. We also have on the expense side some short-term borrowings. So when we're looking at the next 5 years or so, is there any way to have those move together? Like say, okay, in a year when we're going to have higher than expected investment income, we're also going to have higher than expected expenses on this side, and vice versa. I'm sorry, that's not a constructive comment, but I'm just saying, when we're looking at the budget for next year, maybe we maybe don't assume the worst, like investment income is going to be terrible, but short-term borrowings is also going to be high.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we don't do a ton of short-term borrowing, depending on what our rhythm is on when we issue debt. For example, we're closing on a bond sale next week. That's mostly long-term debt, so we're locking that in on the long term. What we will do is spend into a deficit on a capital account. So for example, the fire station project is spending money in fiscal 25 that we haven't necessarily brought money in. So the town's cash flow can cover it, and under municipal finance law, we don't have to bring that money in until a later point. So we're in effect kind of doing that already. So we're lowering our cash flow, which lowers our interest income, but avoiding kind of issuing short-term notes. So we have to close out any deficits on our capital accounts according to a timeline by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. So we'll let those go into deficit until we have an opportunity to borrow. So we're kind of working around that a little bit already. Yeah. This chart just repeats some of the same information. It just shows the outlier that we have in 24. And then in terms of what's going on with the interest rate environment, as you may have seen in the news, that looks like the rates will start to come down in September. So good news if we were going to issue debt on a large construction project, such as a new school. Not as good news in terms of money earning our investments. And our investment income is really driven by where the federal funds target rate has been. As you can see, just on the chart on the left, that it's higher than it has been in recent years. Although we'll start to see that being dialed back. The other big local receipt in recent years has been building permits. Just as new projects create new growth, they also mean projects are paying into the town for building permits. There was a big jump in 24. Right at the end of the year, we got permits for 440 Granite Ave, which I had mentioned, and 711 Randolph Ave, which I had mentioned, and together they were over $400,000. So that explains the big jump, but business has been good for the building department. As we all know, people started renovating during COVID, and it continues to go at pace, but some of the larger projects are coming online and coming through the pipeline now as well.
How is the price of a building permit set? What I'm getting at is, can we just raise the price? That's probably not allowed, is it?
No, we, most cities and towns at this point, it's per $1,000 of value of construction. So as construction values increase, we're supposed to be capturing that permit fee as well over time. It's not a flat fee.
Do we decide how much to charge per 1,000?
Yes, the building department could propose to the select board increasing those rates per 1,000. The other thing, building department revenue should pay for the building department. So it's not a very expensive department to run. So you can push it, but you'd have to be careful as well on the other side. So that's some of the revenues. Talked about local receipts, state aid, property taxes. And the next couple of slides will be about what is the town's financial shape right now. So we were just rated again by S&P, which does our bond rating. So when we go out to issue debt, banks look to the ratings agencies to tell them how's Milton's debt, where is it rated. Ours is rated AAA, which is the highest it can be, which is good. It means that we are able to secure lower interest rates on issuances. A couple of comments that S&P made that I thought was worth highlighting. They wrote that our creditworthiness is supported by its affluent residential economy and cautious budgeting practices leading to balanced to positive operations and maintenance of strong reserves. So positive comment, and then one budget uncertainty is Milton's labor contracts, which expire following fiscal 25. So for some additional color commentary on that, all of the town's union agreements expire in fiscal 25, as do all the school department union contracts. So in terms of what kind of uncertainty exists for fiscal 26 and beyond, one of the biggest is the fact that our collective bargaining agreements will come up at the end of the year. Could they be negotiated before then? Yes. Do we hope they will be? Yes, but that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. With our most recent round of negotiations, some of those dragged out a year or two into the new contract before they were finalized. Anyway, so S&P goes on to say that tax levy is 99% of maximum allowed, limiting flexibility to significantly increase property taxes. Management is considering asking voters to approve an override for fiscal 26, depending on expected expenditure growth. S&P anticipates that Milton's management will make budgetary adjustments as necessary to maintain balanced operations, but if the town's performance materially deteriorates on a sustained basis, we could lower the rating. Their outlook is stable, that they expect that we'll continue to produce balanced budgets and adjust it as necessary. And then lastly, that they could lower the rating if we're unable to make progress toward funding our long-term liabilities or if reserves decrease, leading to an imbalance in our reserves, or if we start to use our reserves without a plan to replace those. So overall, a good report. I will just note on another side note is that there's a paragraph in there about MBTA communities, and S&P raised concerns about how that will play itself out. They closed the paragraph with noting that there's no financial risk to the town at this point, but it was worth just flagging as that is another hot button topic in Milton. On other items, the Milton retirement system is.
Judy has a.
Judy, see your hands up.
Nick, while you were talking about the ratings, I may be jumping a little bit ahead here, but
Sure.
it's popping into my head right now. In terms of our debt exclusion, I mean, it's sort of on the drawing board that we may incur a rather large debt exclusion. Do they have comments on that and how they think it may or may not impact our rating?
We have been disclosing to S&P since I've been in Milton that a project is coming down the pipeline, so they're well aware of it. We've talked about it in each of the ratings calls that I've been on since I've been in Milton. So the rating agencies are well aware of it. If they're taken into an account in any way, they've affirmed our AAA rating each year. They do note in their report, if I'm remembering correctly, that it's coming, but it would be excluded debt, which means it only goes on the books if taxpayers support it. And so the risk to the town is a little more reduced in that case because we're not going forward with a, potentially $173 million school project and just gonna make it work within Prop 2.5. We're saying, okay, town meeting will be asked to fund it, and then voters will be asked to increase their taxes to pay for it. So they treat it a little bit differently because it's a debt exclusion that is up to the voters to approve than if it were us just going out with a major bond project that is not paid for with a dedicated source of funding.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. Is 100% of the debt that the town issues tax-exempt munis?
Yes, we issue tax-exempt bonds, but I think there are things that sometimes trip it into non-tax exempt.
So we do issue some
But we
non.
Generally, yes.
Okay, and then how often do we issue an RFP for the underwriters on the debt?
It's generally on an annual basis. So we've been right now on the last couple of August, we've done a bond sale. So we just had one close, or will close tomorrow after the select board approves it. And that's been the new, you used to have to have the deficits on your books cleared before June 30th, but the finance laws changed, so it enables us to delay some of those borrowings. So it's typically each August. It may vary with a major project like a school project. That timeline might change because of how much it is, and the town's cash flow couldn't support paying for that project.
Thanks.
Yeah. Some of the other financial indicators is that the town's retirement system is fully funded. We reached that in fiscal '24. So we're no longer making catch-up payments into the retirement system to get to full funding. And the deadline to do so was 2040, so we're well in advance of that. A lot of cities and towns are approaching getting closer to full funding. Probably around 2030, 2031 is when a big group and other ones will, but we're ahead of the game on that. We are starting to make progress on the town's OPEB liability. So OPEB is, I guess, a term for other post-employment benefits. It's primarily health insurance for retirees who are no longer actively working but still have a benefit of having health insurance coverage at the town. We pay for that currently through the health insurance budget, so it's a cost we're bearing every year, already. The idea would be that if we can build up the OPEB trust, then we can take that cost off of the town and have the trust pay for it. The trust will accrue earnings on its investments. We have an OPEB policy, something that Jay worked closely with us on, that says now that the retirement system is fully funded, let's take $2.5 million of the amount that we are contributing to full funding and hold on to those for our long-term liabilities, whether OPEB or retirement. So what happened in fiscal '25 is the retirement board set a funding schedule that says, yeah, we're at full funding. We want to ensure that we have a reserve in case of an economic downturn. So they set a funding schedule that asks for funding for the regular cost to maintain plus an additional $1 million. And then our OPEB trust will get the delta there. So $2.5 million set aside for the long-term liabilities. $1 million is going to retirement this year, and $1.5 million is going into OPEB this year. For fiscal '26, we're planning for that to continue. So another $1 million into the retirement system, and 1.5 plus 2.5% is going into OPEB to continue paying down that liability. There's no statutory requirement to reach full funding. It's just something that we feel is important to try to erode that liability and then provide an alternative source for paying these costs in future years. And then stabilization funds, we have 3 stabilization funds, general, capital, and road, that have a balance over $7 million. Our free cash balance currently is minimal. We've appropriated most of it, and free cash, and I'll explain more in a bit, actually doesn't exist anymore once we turn the page into July. So just back to the stabilization fund, $7.4 million. We made a $500,000 contribution into the stabilization fund, the general stabilization, over the course of fiscal '24. These funds also earn investment income. So in fiscal '24 alone, the general stabilization fund increased almost, not quite $1 million, but about $900,000. And our reserves in the stabilization funds are about 5.5% of our general fund operating budget. We want to keep that over at least 5 and continue to make progress towards building that. There is no contribution planned into general stabilization in our current budget year at this point. So this is a source of reserves for, an economic downturn, revenues are going to crater. We want to maintain services. This is a place we would turn to with a plan to replenish those. It's not a place to use to just keep the budget going in regular economic times. And this just shows it as a graph. As you can see, we had, with the COVID impacts in fiscal '21, there was a withdrawal, but then it was restored. And now we're back up investing in those stabilization funds. And then free cash is the other financial indicator. So the last few years really, we've been higher than normal for free cash. So free cash is essentially all the money over estimate that we have at the end of the year, plus all the money departments don't spend that they're budgeted for, minus other items. And Amy's gonna yell at me because that was probably a little too generic of a description, but the Department of Revenue will go through and closely review our free cash certification. Free cash doesn't exist until the Department of Revenue certifies it, but a good starting place is how much money did we bring in more than we expected, how much less money did we spend than we budgeted for, and then the number goes from there.
Do you have an estimate as to what it is this year?
I'll speak to that in a moment.
Okay.
Not really an estimate, but just kind of can give a little bit of color commentary to that. So in terms of fiscal 26, which is our upcoming budget year, we're in fiscal 25 currently. 26 is the following year. What can change over the next several months on the revenue side? So property taxes are pretty much ironclad except for new growth. Property taxes could change if the town moves forward with an override, but that's a bigger decision. Local receipts, so we have finalized our 24 revenues on local receipts. We're gonna see what's going on economically over the next couple of months and then finalize our 24 estimates. State aid is pretty locked in as an estimate for now until January when the governor is expected to release her budget. Sometimes that timeline takes a little bit longer when there's a new legislature every 2 years, so we're hopeful that they'll stay in January, but it could slip a little bit. But state aid, don't really expect new information until January. And then free cash needs to be certified by the Department of Revenue. And this is just to speak to your question. So where did we end in fiscal 24? So we had revenues in excess of budget estimates of about 2.2 million. We had expenditure turnbacks of about $1.8 million for various reasons. So on the revenue side, investment income that I spoke about, building permits, motor vehicle excise were the drivers there. And then expenditure side, we had some vacancies in my office. We had some vacancies in the police department as they are getting back up to full staffing. There's been general turnover, so a more senior employee will leave, a more junior employee will come in. There's savings there. There's savings when that job is vacant. We had a turn back on general insurance for our health insurance. If we're not fully staffed, we're not going to incur all of our expected costs in health insurance. And then debt service was a little bit lower than we had expected. So that, and to speak to your question, that gets us around 3.84 million, and is a kind of a big picture number, but that's not what the number will be. It's just kind of a rough starting point to think about.
Oh,
Yeah, and we'll have more information on that October, November timeframe. And then just kind of turn the page and thinking about what our expenses are and what does that look like. So we have a 5-year forecast that we try to refresh around the close of every fiscal year, and then we'll continue to update it as we go through the budget year. So the next time we'll do a real refresh on it will be after we see departmental budget requests, because right now we just have plugged in percentage increases, and once we have firmer numbers we can refine those. So right now for salaries we plugged a 4% increase across town departments. For general expenses a 3% increase. One of the unknowns will remain collective bargaining, so we will budget for settlements for the collective bargaining agreements. But that will, like I said, nothing is certain until pen to paper on those agreements. The school's budget right now in 25 and 26 is just placeholders to show us what it would look like. So I've plugged a 4.5% in 25 and a 5% in 26 to say, if the school budget went up by that much, where does that leave us? They've had a transition in terms of their leadership on the financial side, so their budget process is commencing, but I didn't want to get too far over my skis on that. Right now, we don't plan for any capital. Capital is typically funded directly out of free cash, so it's not really affecting our bottom line on the budget. Health insurance, we have at a 5% premium increase. That is probably a little bit below trend, but we've been in pretty good shape on health insurance the past few years. As I mentioned, we're at the retirement system. That is locked in. OPEB trust we know what that contribution will be. Right now, our expenditures don't include a contribution to the stabilization funds, and debt service for 26 anyway includes that's been authorized, but we haven't yet issued it, so we're not paying on it yet. We expect those projects to complete. So in terms of a big picture, where does that leave us? I'm going to put caveats all over this number that it may go up. It's just a ballpark. I don't want to hear, oh, you told us $4.6 million in 3 months when we have more information. So that is today. I think it's both conservative and I feel fairly accurate, if that makes any sense to anybody. So I think to think about what do we have to make up of a range of between 4.5 and 5.5 million is probably the best way to think about this number. as things stand today. And that is why there's been a lot of talk about, is this the year that there will be an override? With the free cash number, that might give us tools that we don't always have to avoid or not have an override. That comes at a cost. That means we're not investing in departments, we're not expanding services, we're not trying to increase services, we're just trying to keep things the same. But that's kind of the big picture outlook as of today. The last few years, we've had federal funding through the American Rescue Plan Act that has helped us make our budgets work, invest in our departments. That money is essentially gone at the end of calendar year 24. So it leaves us, thinking about what are we going to do long term. That's really it on the budget stuff. I see Ron has his hand up. So.
Ron, question?
Thanks for all the information. It's super helpful. Can you explain what an override, how that works, and what the mechanism is? I'm not too familiar with it, and I don't know if the rest of the warrant committee is familiar with it, but it'd be helpful if someone provided some information on how the override works.
Sure. So,
thank you.
At the basic level, what it is it's asking to increase taxes that we levy on folks. So, if the policy decision were to pursue an override, one of the jobs would be to come up with an analysis of what the right number is, because you don't want it to be too low, that it's not sustainable, and that you ask voters to increase their taxes, and then the next year you're looking at each other saying, hey, we don't have enough money for the budget 1 year after an override. That's kind of a worst case scenario. On the flip side, you don't want to have too much money in the override ask because you might turn voters off or just be increasing taxes more than you need to. Really, the override is just giving us the authority to increase the taxes. It's not levying those taxes so much. It's a policy decision by the select board. The select board is the only board or committee that can put an override question to the voters. It's the town meeting can make a budget contingent on an override, but a town meeting can't force an override to happen. So it really does speak to kind of boards and committees in town coming together and agreeing that this is the right decision and the right year to do so, and having people work together on that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the gist of, we would come up with a budget that works, figure out what a right override number is, work with the select board and other boards and committees to reach an agreement on that. It would go to town meeting for approval to appropriate those monies, and then be contingent most likely on voters approving increases to the taxes for that.
Got it. So would there be like a secondary budget in case the override got voted down?
Yes, what Milton has done historically is had essentially 2 budgets approved at town meeting. One budget that is not contingent on an override, and another budget, a second budget that is higher, that is contingent on the override. So if town meeting approves 2 budgets, override goes to voters, voters vote the override down, the lower budget goes into effect. If they approve the override, the higher budget goes into effect.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Super helpful.
Sure.
Hi, I have a question. So with respect to this $4.6 million number, so my understanding is that if there is an override, that the select board would put that to the voters in the spring, I think. I don't know, maybe. So can you tell me again which numbers we'll have more clarity on? Because I believe you that it's conservative but accurate, but we'll know more as far as whatever the governor approves in her budget, January-ish, maybe February. Will we also know about the union contracts by then, the collective bargaining agreements? We don't know.
So I think in terms
Sort of, I'm
of
trying to
the
see what's in
expenses,
flux.
Yeah, so I think this month, by the end of this month in the fall, we'll have a very good idea of what town departments are going to need for the general expenses.
Yep.
We're going to know what the step increases for union employees are. What will remain unknown is what the cost of living adjustment for employees is.
Okay.
Most of our employees in Milton are unionized. So, in our last round of bargaining, public safety was higher than non-public safety. Mm-hmm. Non-public safety was, a couple percent a year. Public safety was a little bit more than that. So what teachers will do and what the school unions are doing, that's been a challenging dynamic in other communities. Hopefully we don't face that here. So that will remain an unknown. The general expenses we should be able to nail down pretty good. The revenue, so yeah, state aid we'll know in January. We'll have a better idea in January. Property taxes are what they are unless there's an override. Local receipts, even if it fluctuates, it's not going to fluctuate by a ton to make or break, $5 million. State aid could, it's gone up. There's been years where it's gone up $1 million, so that there's a chance there. And then free cash is the one that we'll know in the fall. That would be another source of funding for the budget.
Thanks.
Nick, I have a question for you, if I can get it right. So with respect to an override, breaking that down, if you look at that, so 4.6 or whatever it's going to be, the debt up there projected. The offsets I get at state, free cash, potentially offset that carry. So what's included in that override number? Would the school be included in that as well?
The school project?
Yes.
That would be a separate question.
So that'd be separate. So that'd be additive of a potential override increase, right? That's important to understand. And then, so I'm just trying to break that apart. I think that's really important as we move forward.
Sure.
That there is clarity that there are separate cost increases that are going to go up, right? There's an override, there's a school, right? And there's a fire department that's still being built as well, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that everyone understands these are separate discussions, separate votes, separate everything, right?
Yep.
It's really important.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that, I'm going to use a higher range of $4.5 to $5.5 million for the level service budget. That's a level service budget. That's not saying, hey, we should add a few teachers here. We should add employees in XYZ departments.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
There's no additive. That's just to roll over kind of current existing services.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So when you say level budget, is that inclusive of the shortfalls we saw in the education budget that we had to add, the school budgets where you had to add more money in there twice, once where the state gave an offset because there was an adjustment, and then the shift of ARPA funding coming over?
So that was what Steve is referencing, is that the school department was in deficit at year end, so the select board reallocated some federal funding to close that deficit. It was about $415,000 at the year end. Their fiscal 25 budget, so the new budget year, that went up almost 9%. My expectation is that should be sufficient to fund their budget.
That includes that increase, those two increases?
Those were one-time kind of retrospective facing. So
they're not
their
up.
budget, their fiscal 25 budget is 9% increase over their fiscal 24 budget, and rolled in a lot of the positions that had previously been funded through federal funding. So I think they should be able to meet that appropriation. The expectation from the town should be they meet that appropriation, but that's kind of for them to manage. So yeah, in terms of what does the override have, it's what does the deficit number today have? That's a level service range. If we want to invest in departments, that's an added cost. If we want to staff a new school building, that's an added cost in a future year. Not in fiscal 26, but when that new school opens, there's a carrying cost for staff there as well. And then capital questions around the new school, which I have some in numbers for and can share, is a separate question, but an additional increase potentially to taxpayers.
Thank you.
Sure.
To follow on to what Steve was saying, the override, can you talk about when that actually affects taxpayers?
Sure. So the operating override would go into effect if it was approved for fiscal 26, it would go into effect on your tax bills in that fiscal year. And so it would be, not to say immediate, you're not going to get a bill the next day in the mail, but you will eventually from us get a bill where it will be reflected in that fiscal year directly.
But the debt exclusion, which would be the $173 million for the school, it's not going to happen immediately like that.
No, and here, I'll just flip over to this. So this was the debt service schedule produced for the new school, assuming it was approved in November. So it expected construction and stuff to start.
I'm sorry.
I can't right now, so I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The point is really just that, as Lori was referencing, the debt here was going to start much lower in the first year. because of when we would have needed to bring the money in and start incurring those costs. So there would have been a small increase in fiscal 26 and then a much larger increase in fiscal 27. As the timeline changes, this might change, but I think the overall point is a debt exclusion you might not feel immediately, whereas an operating override, that fiscal year, those impacts will be felt.
And then back to, you mentioned the ongoing costs or the costs for operating the new school. Would be another override, and would it be baked into the main override, or would it be baked into the 173? How does that work?
It couldn't be part of the debt exclusion for the school building.
Because it's ongoing.
Because that is, that's a capital approval process, not an ongoing cost. So whether it would be built into this budget, to this operating override, or some future override, or just not built into an override, and the school department has to make it work, those are all good questions that we'll have to think about and talk about and work together on over the next 18 to 24 months, depending on the timeline of that project.
If we did, though, an override in the spring, would you be able to do like 2 phases of the override? Like, this is what we need to go into effect July 1st, but then we anticipate another $2.5 million to run the school, and that will go into effect whenever the school is built? Or do you have to?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. The other one thing to think about is, or one possible solution would be, an override is only increasing what can be levied. It doesn't say we shall therefore levy that full amount. Like, if say the override was $7 million and $1 million of it, and these are just round numbers as an example,
Right.
where it's going to go to fund the new school staffing. There could be an agreement that that $1 million won't get touched for the first couple of years, but again, the voters are then granting that authority for that full amount to be levied. Boards and committees could work together not to utilize all of it, but I don't know that you could say, $5 million in fiscal 26 and then an additional $1 million 2 years later. I think that would have to be a subsequent vote.
Okay.
Procedurally.
We got Judy's hands up, Nick.
Yep.
Judy?
Okay, Nick, I may be jumping ahead on you, but could you explain in detail how debt exclusion works? And I might, if I can, give you an example. We are going to take out, let's just say, a loan, like a car loan, a home loan, similar, for principal and interest. Everyone seems to forget that little plus sign. It's not just 173, the number that's being floated. It's 173 plus interest. So, and we know we can't know exactly what the full number will be because we don't know what the interest rate will be given to the town of Milton for their loan. So here's in my own head, I confused myself. So if I pass that on to you, try and figure it out for me, okay?
You have it right. It's think of it like a mortgage.
Yeah, or a car loan.
Yeah.
So here's a quick question that popped into my head, or it's actually on my list. When one does this, takes a loan out under debt exclusion, I'm sure there's no prepayment penalties, right?
There are municipal and tax finance laws that affect what we can do in terms of prepayment, refunding, et cetera. So,
Which kind of brings me around to, and if it's easier for me to explain using like a homeowner. So I take out a mortgage for $1 to buy a house. And now you, the town, calculate what my taxes are based on the assessed value of this home that I just took. So we got 2 separate things going on here. The bank loaned me $1 to buy a house, and they expect me to pay another $1 in interest after 30 years and of letting me have this loan. And so actually I will be paying $2 to buy my house. But now we go to the tax portion. In a way. So how you get money from each property in the town, not the individuals, because I think this debt exclusion marries itself to the property. So each of us could be paying different amounts into this debt exclusion, like we do pay regular tax levies, because if you have a house, the town says it's worth $2, you're paying more taxes than me. They only say mine's worth $1. So, is that how debt exclusion works as well? So your house is still assessed at $2, mine is still assessed at $1. So when we're all paying back this principal and interest, I love saying that extra word when I'm talking to people about this, are we going to put equal money into this loan, or are we going to put in money based on the assessment of our the property we manage?
Yes.
Do I make sense here?
Yes, your question makes sense, and yes, this isn't a special tax on everybody for the same amount. The town will levy taxes as much as it's allowed to on its residents, and everybody will pay according to the assessed value. And commercial owners will pay their assessed value times the commercial rate. Residential homeowners will pay their assessed value by the residential rate. So yes, there would be variability based on your value, that how much your tax bill will increase because of the school project, or because of how your taxes change year over year. It's the same. It would be a higher increase if the school were approved than if it were not, or it would be a higher increase if an operating override were approved than if it were not.
Okay, so it kind of leads me to the next question. So I bought my house for $1, and 10 years later it's worth $1.50. Now, so 10 years out, say it happens this year. So 10 years in 2034, my house value gets reassessed to $1.50. Does my debt exclusion increase as well? So the debt exclusion now goes, so my debt exclusion price tag will increase as well.
Correct. If
Do I make any sense here?
No, you are. If your house is appreciating at a value faster than the average house, then the amount that you pay will go up over time. So year over year, your tax burden may increase depending on the value of the home that you're living in, for debt exclusion, as well as for all the taxes that the town levies for property taxes.
Which kind of loops me back to, if you don't mind, because I'm trying to understand this in, sort of personal terms of how I understand loans. So as, say, there's a boom in property in Milton, and everyone's house doubles. So now you're taking in more money than you did in the last decade. So as you're taking in more money, because you are asking everyone to pay back the debt exclusion based on the value of your home, your assessed value, which we all pretty much understand as property owners. Will that, in fact, trigger you paying off the loan earlier because you're taking in more money? Do I make sense?
Just because your values increase does not mean the town will be taking in that much more money. Our levy is, the town's limited by Proposition 2.5 by how much it can levy. So everybody's values go up by $1 million, everybody's tax rates will go down and tax bills will stay more or less the same. So no, just because if values went up, it doesn't mean the town would necessarily be bringing in drastically more money. We're still limited to Proposition 2.5. If there's new growth because there's a new, this new skyscraper, 40 stories high, would that reduce everybody's tax burden? Sure. Would there be other costs? Perhaps, but it's really the new growth that would really shift that dynamic, not general property value increases, because the limitations of Prop 2.5 don't let that happen.
So, in other words, what I think I'm understanding from you is there's not like a car loan, a mortgage loan. Unless you took out an ARM or something, but if you took a regular fixed rate mortgage, your payments are the same every month. So on this debt exclusion, would not your payments to whoever loans us this money remain the same every month?
The town's payments, yes. A property owner's payments, no, because they'll fluctuate depending on what the value of your home is doing, but also what values in the town are doing. If values are shifting around town, maybe your taxes will go up more slowly than others. They might go up more quickly depending on what's going on. So it's kind of more of a macro kind of question. Most likely when we issue this debt, the town's cost of debt service will be around $10 million a year for 27 years. So that is what will be locked in. The share that individual taxpayers pay of that might change over that time period.
Okay, and have you ever seen on these types of loans by municipalities, so it doesn't happen that at the end of the loan, all of a sudden you realize, oh, I've paid $30 more for my loan than I should have, and somebody's got to give me money back. What do you do with that $30? If in fact, all the calculations came out and, it wasn't to the penny in a way, you end up with $30 extra at the end of the 30 years. What do you do with that money? You put it back in the general fund?
General law, we can only tax to pay the exact debt costs of the project. If we can't tax $1 million if our debt exclusion is $500,000, and our debt service is $500,000. We can only tax. That's the benefit of the debt exclusion, is it's not a permanent increase in perpetuity to the tax levy. It's a defined increase for a specific project, and once that project is complete, we stop collecting, and we can only collect the debt service associated with that project. So, and in terms of refinancing or prepayment, there are mechanisms to refund municipal loans. It's not done too often. It would be done if we could secure a better interest rate. And it's usually sometimes many years until a loan where those options come up. So I hope that answers your questions.
It does. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Judy. Allison, you had your hand up a while ago.
Hi, thanks, Nick, for the info. I just got a question. You gave a proposed 4.6. Do you have a breakdown for what the school's debt was? Just my first question.
I don't have it in front of me. I can follow up with you.
Okay, because last year towards I went back to a previous meeting and we were at over 4 million on including ARPA and positions that were being filled through free cash. So I was just curious if you could provide that for me. I'm wondering, I understand we're maintaining level service, but I question the amount of positions filled over the last few years and being able and how we were going to meet with the ARPA losing the money. Because I just went back to the budget while we were on the call, and we have over like 2 million in positions that are being that we used ARPA money for. So I was just curious if that breakdown for that, if you had any info.
So what I have, just to be kind of clear as to what we did, is I plugged a 4.5% increase to give us a number. That's not their budget. So I don't want to assign budget numbers to folks. It's just, I said, in this scenario, if the school budget went up by 4.5%, where does that leave us? just to have kind of a taking of a temperature of where the budget stands. So I can get you what that translates into dollars, but I don't want to characterize it as their number or something that's been requested or anything else. It's just kind of to do this exercise.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's like, I know it's starting to get into like really the fine details, so that's why, you know, like I was like, well, okay, interested in to know if that was included the positions that were funded, and so it doesn't.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned about like like if there were skyscrapers, the cost might be going down, or if everyone's house was going up $1 million, correct? So like taxes are never necessarily going to go down. Is it just more just being allocated somewhere else? Always just never truly going down?
They can go down. You can do an underride in Massachusetts, but that was unusual. Yes, taxes generally will continue to increase in the 2.5% to 3.5% range year over year. What options does a city or town have to move how its revenues come into play? Is you could think about different ways of economic development. Those might have different costs that come along with it, but business growth might be one way to say, let's go grab some more tax revenue. But that's kind of a bigger picture question for the town to wrestle with.
Gotcha, thank you.
Liz?
So this graph here shows 30 years in the future for the school project. With respect to the operational override, I think you said, but I missed it, I'm sorry. That would be affected on our tax bill next year, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this would be sort of broken out, almost like a mortgage in the next 30 years.
Yes, so the operating override would be permanent, but you would immediately feel the impact in the first year. So if an override is approved and levy went up by $7 million, let's say, it'll be permanently increased by that $7 million forever. On a
No, I don't understand that, because if my taxes on my house, say, I'm just gonna make up an even low number, $1,000 up a year. If you approve the operational override and it went up 7.5%, it's gonna go up that much every year. It's gonna be 7.5% higher.
No, I see what you're saying.
It's only gonna be the one time.
The first year will be the
Yeah.
7% increase, and then
Right.
from there on, it'll be 3% on the new higher
Yep.
number forever.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, in this case, the debt exclusion will be funding debt service that stays at around $10 million a year for 30 years, declining at the end. So the share of your tax bill that goes to a school project over 30 years would decline in real value over those 30 years.
Yeah, over time. But then with respect to the operational override, in a way, it seems like to me, well, it's only affecting me in the first year. But really what you're saying, I guess, correct me, is that it's really in perpetuity that amount over. So whereas we see, okay, in 2018 or whatever the last year that we had one, 2018, I think, it went up 7.5%. It's really the next year, it's another 2.5% or 3% on top of that.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
So it's affecting you into the future.
Correct.
Forever.
It's not just, okay, thank you.
Your baseline sets.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
great.
exactly. There's a new base.
Thanks.
Those videos that I was talking about earlier, the YouTube videos on tax levies and overrides,
Yeah.
in Tom's email from
Hang on.
back when, they're really, they answer a lot of the questions. It's really, really useful. I would recommend.
Oh, I'm just not a math person.
It's all right.
No,
A lot of lawyers aren't.
It's
No,
not
it's
even,
okay.
they do a really good job of breaking down different categories and how overrides and exclusions differ from each other. And like, I actually took notes, and specifically overrides, for example, permanently increases the levy limit.
Right.
So
I'm not confused about that. I just wanted to point out, so for people that are seeing sort of this chart, it looks like, oh my goodness, for 30 years, it's gonna be increasing. I think the same is sort of,
well, it's fixed.
It depends on-
The difference is what you're
it
paying in
depends on
principal
how
versus
you look
interest.
at it though. But I think it could see like, oh, it's lasting for this entire time, but either way. So I guess it depends on what the select board wants to do.
It's like a home mortgage where it's the fixed dollar amount. It's just that as you get towards the end of the period of the 30-year debt, you're paying off more principal, less interest. And the inverse is true, just like a home mortgage at the beginning of the loan.
Yep, that's right. And I think to put in the context of the operating override and debt exclusion is, this estimate said that our peak debt service payment for the duration would be about $10 million. So that would be about a 10% increase on our levy, 10% increase on your taxes. And then that would be in place for that duration. It wouldn't be 10% each year going up. It's going to be a 10% increase.
Right.
Then you're going to have that burden for the next 30 years, for more or less.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I know some people have asked, but I have never really known one way or another. Will the town be providing, so if the select board were to propose a vote on this, would the town be providing people with a calculator to determine? I know that's a lot.
No, so what we did is
Estimate?
we have a website now with school project cost information. We don't have a calculator on there. The Department of Revenue has one, so you can kind of do that yourself. We plan to, once this is going forward and on the ballot and going to town meeting, to have that in place. Right now, we have the numbers that you can use to figure it out yourself, but we don't have it up currently. So,
And also for the override?
if that is the direction we go in, we would do something similar for that
Similar,
as well.
okay, thank you.
Same idea.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
I went on there and saw the range. It's got a table with ranges on there, which is helpful. I think it would be helpful, suggestion perhaps.
Sure.
If you have that table, have it on there with the override and the school together so they can see a net increase, because your baseline adjusts for the forever. It doesn't go back. That moves that. They're not going to lower the taxes ever for the town. It just sets a baseline, correct? And so we just keep going up. So there's no payoff date for that.
If both are moving forward, or whatever the scenario is, and when we get to that in the spring, we'll be providing that kind of clarity and transparency as what the potential impact will be to everybody. So just to touch on the school project, so this website's up. There's tools on there if you want to kind of play around with the numbers, see what they look like. Our assumption right now on the $173 million is 30 years, 4.25%. Level debt payments, like I showed on the chart, with it, climbing and then staying at about $10 million a year for a long time. Assuming we maintain our AAA bond rating, which we have been affirmed for. So, like I said, it's roughly a 10% increase on a house in Milton. This is, again, the debt service chart showing, it'll phase up to the 10 million and stay at that for the duration. So the tax impacts, if you wanted to do the math, it's $1.11 per $1,000 of value for a residential home. Again, this is just pulling information that's on that website. And then kind of drilling down to the average single family home is just over $1 million. Their tax bill is about $11,000. So the estimated impact would be about somewhere between $1,100 and $1,200 for the average single family home, and then it's slightly less for the median. To find that house that's kind of more typical at about $872,000 would be about $968 on the average house. And that would be for the duration of those debt payments. A little bit less at the beginning, but then that's what we would expect it to be for the life of that. And then what is the process?
What if there's a cost overrun on it? So it's 173, say it went through, and they found conditions of construction costs went up, and they needed another 10 million or something. Would that have to be separate?
The $173 million we would expect under the process, and I'll talk about the process in a second, would be approved by town meeting, and that's a limit. There's contingency baked into the budget, so it shouldn't exceed that $173 million. If it were, most likely it would require another town meeting vote and potentially another ballot question vote, depending on the situation of the cost overrun. But most likely, at least a town meeting vote.
Okay.
And then process for a debt exclusion. One thing I think got perhaps lost in translation, wasn't explained well enough during this process when the select board was debating it, is there's a lot of focus on the ballot question aspect of it, and why isn't there a number in the ballot question, but just the debt exclusion requires 2 votes, ballot question and town meeting, and they're linked. So a ballot question would, this is written in conformance with Prop 2.5, the law, it's reviewed by bond council, they're 2 separate actions, they both need to be done. The voters must approve the ballot question by a majority approval. The ballot question is asking voters to increase their taxes to pay the debt service of a specific capital project. Town meeting is asked to appropriate a certain amount of money for a project and authorize issuance of debt. So again, in this case, town meeting would appropriate the amount of money and authorize issuing $173 million of town debt. The voters are being asked, yes, we want to pay for those debt service costs on our tax bill every year for the next however many years it takes to pay it off. So 2 separate actions, both required, and then they're linked. And what I did as an example is just to pull the last one we did, which is the fire station projects. So here's the motion at town meeting in February of 21. So town voted to appropriate the sum of $32 million. It describes the project, authorizes the treasurer to issue bonds or notes on behalf of the town. And then the last sentence, if you skip down, said appropriation is contingent upon passage by the voters of Milton of a referendum question under Chapter 59, that's Prop 2.5, exempting this debt service from Prop 2.5. So that's what town meeting approved. They approved the amount, they moved the project description and authorizing debt, and made a contingent on a ballot question. And then the ballot question here on the top was pretty generic ballot question. These have to be like this by law, so shall the voters be allowed to exempt from Prop 2.5 the amount required to pay for the bond issued in order to construct and equip a new fire headquarters and 2 fire substations. So much less descriptive, much less information. That's the process played out under law. So what would happen in this case is the town meeting vote would track probably pretty similar to this with a different amount, a different project description, and then most likely be contingent on the ballot question. So that's the process, the 2 different actions that are required by the 2 different bodies. And the sequence doesn't matter. Milton has historically done town meeting first, then ballot question. It can go ballot question, then town meeting. They have to be relatively close in time to each other, but what that exact sequence is not required under the law.
So when it comes to like the debt exclusion, debt amounts, like the levy, especially when we're like talking about the like chapters, like sections, does there does that like have any influence with like the state aid? Is there like conditions that we have to meet before we like receive like state aid, or is that just typically procedural? They just hand state aid?
For state aid generally, that comes to the general fund budget, because it's driven by different other laws that the town complies with and has to follow. So like Chapter 70 education aid, that Chapter 70 is the statute in Mass General laws that lays out how that aid is supposed to be administered. So it's not really conditioned on other actions by a city or town. So there are other grants and other programs that Milton can take advantage of that is, up to us to go do. That's separate, but generally the state aid that comes to the town is pretty much guarantee is not the right word, but it's just a function of the way everything works.
I was curious because since you mentioned about how like Milton has the highest rating for for AAA when it comes to receiving, being able to pay at a lower interest rate, I was just curious if like that state aid, usually that's factored in when it comes to like a section of towns like a reliability.
No, the AAA bond rating will help us have a lower interest rate, but they're not connected otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Judy?
Thank you. So Nick, looking at that 2021 fire station motion before town meeting.
Judy?
Yes, can you
have
hear
a
me?
question?
My audio's on. Yeah, my audio's on.
Yeah, Judy, do you have a question? We saw your hand raised.
Yes.
Fire away.
So I started to say, Nick, looking at the 2021 fire station motion before the town meeting for the debt exclusion for that. The sum of money, and I don't remember, I feel badly, I don't. You're only, at the town meeting motion, article, you only include the sum of money for the actual project, not the interest that you're gonna be paying on the loan. So we're back to, I take a loan out for $1, but I have to pay $1 in interest. So I'm really gonna be voting, do I wanna spend $2 for buying this property or doing this project?
Correct.
Do
The
I
town
make-
is, yes, the town is appropriating the amount for the capital project. What we would share ahead of that meeting is what we would expect your principal and interest payments to be on an annual basis. So that's where this chart with $10 million a year roughly accounts for what the town will have to pay in principal interest for the life of that project. So I don't
Okay.
have the number, but it's 173 million-ish in principal and some other number in interest. I could get that, but it's more than 173, yes, but the appropriation that town meeting is asked to make is for the explicit capital project in front of them.
But they will be made mention that somewhere in all of this that it's not gonna be $1. At the end of the loan, it's gonna, you, the taxpayers, are gonna spend $2 for this project.
Yep, we will
Thank
share
you.
that information.
Yeah, I know that I think I understand this, but I'm guessing by my questions, I don't really.
Unless you want to give us a no-interest loan for it.
Well, you know, Nick, let me look over my budget this
All right.
week.
Let us know.
I'll let you know by Friday, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
That's really all I had, so happy to take any other questions.
job.
I
Yeah,
addressed
so-
anything explicitly.
Ms. Milan, I really want to thank you for all that information. And I know we kind of, we're hitting you with questions
No,
during your presentation. Probably maybe kind of a good way to do it, I guess, while the issue's hot. Does anybody have any other general questions about the 2025 budget, the process that both you and Amy undertake in putting together the budgetary articles in the warrant? Is there anything that, if anybody has any questions to that? Ryan?
I do have a question. I mean, I'm kind of wondering what the process is. Like, does the select board say we want to do this, we vote on this? Like, if they had voted on the school, then would we be now, does it go to them first, then to us, then to the town meeting? That's how
Yes.
it works. Okay.
So, you know, there will be an article proposed for whatever, and it's voted on by the select board. It comes to the warrant committee. We comment on it, discuss it,
Right.
and we relay those comments to the town in the warrant.
So we're
Concerning how, you know, as the unelected 15 people from the town, from various precincts, what we think about this. And, you know, that's obviously then voted on at town meeting. I know sometimes we get things that we've discussed before the select board has voted on it. I think that's happened before, but
Yeah, I think just in terms of the school project, that would, you know, emanate through school building committee and the select board and arrive to the warrant committee. In terms of the budget, you know, we'll provide you a budget. One of the jobs in the special law that gives me my duties and otherwise is to prepare a budget that is balanced, that would be delivered to the warrant committee. So I intend to do that, and we'll have that with you. I think the goal would be to have, you know, consensus among boards and committees in towns that this is the right budget for the town, and we'd want to work towards that. There might be different perspectives that we have to work through, or maybe we just can't reach an agreement on, but I think the goal would be to be collaborative. I'll deliver a budget, but we'll want to work towards, you know, getting to a place where the warrant committee supports it, school committee supports it, select board supports it, so that we're going to town meeting kind of prepared for that and ready to go. But that's not necessarily, it has to be that way, but I think that's operationally would be the best way to operate if we can, to kind of operate by consensus. But disagreements happen, and that's okay too, especially when we're talking about operating overrides and school projects. I think in terms of the budget, we'd want to work to have everybody on the same page, at least on what we're spending where and why.
That's the Hurley amendment. Is that the?
That's how we plan for the fire station anyway, for now.
Not for the schools.
Jay, do you have any follow-up to that?
I don't think I do, except to say that, I mean, I don't know what you're thinking for how long tonight, except to say that I think this has been a good conversation, and I'd like to continue in another meeting.
Okay. But do you have any, I just meant as to the process with the budget.
Yeah, I don't.
Just, I don't know, just for the new members, if there's anything that you can.
I mean, there's the eternal question, which I don't think we'll answer, and I don't know if we have answered in the past couple of years, which is, Mr. Milano is going to present us with a balanced budget, and we then recommend a budget to town meeting. You know, maybe Mr. Milano says the library budget should be $5 million. In what circumstances should we as the warrant committee say, no, it shouldn't be $5 million, it should be $5.1 million, it should be 4.9. And I don't know, you know, it's an open-ended question. I don't know that we've ever decided for ourselves when we should make a change to this. Except that Mr. Milano just made a very good point, which is we can make a change. We can say, oh, Mr. Milano recommended $5 million. And then just to clarify, we recommend a budget to town meeting. So we might recommend to town meeting, no, we think he's wrong. We recommend to town meeting $5.1 million. What Mr. Milano said is, it works best when the warrant committee and the select board and the school committee, if they're so involved, all agree. So we can sort of veto them and say, we don't care what you want, we want to change it this way. This is not, you know, this question is very open-ended, will require a lot of thought. And maybe, you know, one answer might be time. You know, in the past couple of years, for one reason or other, we've started looking at budgets pretty late in the process. And if we did say, the library budget should be a little bit higher, we're up against it. We've got to close the warrant so it can be printed in time. So if we're having these discussions 1 month, 2 months, 3 months earlier than we have in previous years, that might lead to, we have a different opinion than Mr. Milano on this budget. Let's talk to the select board. Let's talk to Mr. Milano, Ms. Dexter.
Great thing to think about. And
No,
I think
I-
we should discuss, you know, moving forward, I think.
I agree. I think it's a great point, and I agree. The biggest issue is if all we're talking about is a delta or increases to the prior year's budget, that assumes that the underlying baseline budget is correct, and then from time to time we need to dig into that and make sure that those underlying pieces are what we think are fiscally responsible. In addition to the proposed changes. So I'm all for it. I don't like wasting money.
Anybody have anything else for Mr. Milano?
I have a question.
Sure,
Sorry.
before he leaves.
And Amy might even be able to shed some light. So I sat in on the school committee finance subcommittee meeting. Well, I usually sit in on them. And their budget was set. Their actual expenditures came in much higher, to the tune of $3+ million. And they were able to take it out of reserves. What will happen? Like, will they need to re-reserve all of that now? Because they just lowered the reserves by $3.5 million?
I think just generally, I'll let Amy speak to it more. You can't build up reserves like that, so it's going to take time, I think was the only way to put it.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't want to speak on behalf of the schools, but it's my understanding from conversations with Katie Blake, who's the new assistant superintendent for business, and from what I know when I was up there. When they say reserves, it's not the same as when we talk about reserves like stabilization. So by reserves, they're hitting some of their revolving funds. So for instance, they have revolving funds from when they rent out the school auditorium or the school gym, and that goes into a revolving fund. And it's applicable that maybe we're gonna charge more of the building maintenance to that fund this year to help absorb some of the overage. And then they have, their biggest piece is what's called circuit breaker, which relates to special education. So if Milton Public Schools spends X dollars on special ed, we apply for circuit breaker reimbursement of those costs. We don't get 100% back, but they'll get a percentage which can range from, it's not like 90%, it's more like maybe 60%, 70%, something like that. But there's a time lag from when we get it. So when they speak about reserves related to that, it's, we would always, or not we, but you would, your goal would be to leave some of that in the circuit breaker revolving fund for unexpected things such as what just happened. We were able to do that for as long as I've been involved with the town without completely emptying it out. And it will be replenished when we get reimbursements for expenses from prior year that haven't been reimbursed yet. That makes sense, but it's going to take a while to build it back up to where it was. So it's definitely, they won't have the flexibility
that they've had
the next year because there won't be as much in there because more of it was depleted. Does that answer the
Well, I was
question?
like, oh my gosh, are we gonna have to?
But I would definitely recommend you call Katie
I was
Blake and have
in
that
touch. I
conversation
was in
because
touch.
Nick and I don't want to
Oh, no, and
speak
I'm
for
not.
them, and that's just my basic understanding.
Well, from
And even
being-
though I was there 2 years to understand school finance is a very short period.
Well,
So-
and she actually brought up on the call that a policy they might want to have is to be able to reserve 2 to 4% of their operating budget. Just as a line item in the fund, in their budget.
But she's really,
She seems,
she's
Got it.
great,
She's
what
got it, yeah.
my interaction with her so far, and she has a long history, experience of working in Massachusetts public schools in the business role, so she could definitely answer it better than I
well, I
could.
just thought of it when I was
Yeah.
thinking about the 4.6 and, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I hadn't heard that big of a number, but.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Just, I said, open door, please. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to chat. My wife is pregnant and expecting September 23rd-ish, so either before then or a few weeks thereafter that there'll be a few weeks where I will be a little bit harder to track down, but no, if you want to pop in, please do so. And look forward to working with all of you over the next several months here.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Nick, thank you so much for coming here, taking the time to meet with us on these some of the elementary issues. Amy, thank you for accompanying him and offering the additional words.
Super good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so warrant committee members, we've had questions here. We've also, I guess, maybe had a quasi discussion. I'm mindful of time, but is there anything anybody would like to mention, just concerned about maybe the boatload of information that we've heard tonight? I know I'll probably have to go back and look at it and think about it, but is there anything that anybody would like to mention just regarding what we heard, a surprise, frustration? Nope. Jay?
I'll just mention something that I sort of talked about at our last meeting, which is I've looked at a couple successful overrides in other towns, and some of them had a very deliberate, very, I'll say, long process. They studied their budgets for a year, 2 years, more, and then they presented an override. And that may not be feasible here, but we have depending on when we might go for an override, we have either 6 months or 18 months till the town could be voting on an override. And I would love to see it, us, when I say us, I mean the whole town, I'm not sure who, get into a deliberate process like that, you know, discuss where the town's finances are publicly, discuss, you know, where we're going, you know, how an override would work not only the first year, but as Mr. Milano said, the first year and subsequent years after that. If we're going to be voting on this 18 months from now, I'd like to start it now. If we're going to be voting on it 6 months from now, I'd like to start it yesterday, but we can't. So I'm sort of throwing out there, what role should the Warrant Committee play in this?
And what do you think, Jay? Why don't you tell us?
I think I'd say somebody should be running with it. And I think that somebody certainly could be us. And if, you know, unless Mr. Milano comes to us tomorrow and says, I've got these public meetings set up for the next 6 months, I think we could, you know, do some research, do some digging, look at what the other towns did, bring Mr. Milano. It would be a lot of getting our hands dirty, getting in there, digging into numbers, and then holding public meetings. I've heard, you know, I've talked to some people on this committee, and people say, well, the Warrant Committee doesn't have, I mean, we have public meetings, but the Warrant Committee doesn't have meetings where people come up and ask us questions. Well, maybe we could, or maybe it wouldn't be a Warrant Committee meeting, maybe it'd be some other function, but I guess I'll just say, as a town resident, it seemed to me the last time that we had an override, it was, we get to the spring, we look at our budget, we say, oh no, we're gonna have layoffs if we don't have an override, let's hope an override really quick. It was, I won't say it was thrown together, but as a resident, it seemed like it was thrown together really quickly. And I'd like to convey to the town, we're not slapping something together in March to avoid layoffs. We're doing something deliberate, something ahead of time, and we're bringing the town with us. We're having meetings where we hope that dozens, if not more than dozens of town members come and listen to us and find out what the situation is and why we might need an override and get, you know, be a part of the process to come along with us. And it's a deliberate process. So that was a bit of a ramble, but I guess I'll say if we don't have any indication that somebody else is running with this, I'd love to see the Warrant Committee run with it.
It's good. It's a great idea. Thank you. Anybody?
No, I was going to discuss the Teams thing after the.
Oh, okay.
You told me to talk to you about it.
Sure.
To add to
Liz,
what
absolutely.
Jay said. So part of my thought is if one of our functions is to provide sort of our advisory opinion with our comments on the warrant before the town meeting, to be able to provide to town meeting, of which I am also a member, but I love the robust discussion that we have there, but I think that I've heard, you know, in the ether, some frustration that we're kind of working some of the things out and asking questions at town meeting that maybe could have been addressed earlier. And so if one of our purposes as the Warrant Committee is to dig in, and, you know, I think a lot of town meeting members of all, you know, stripes really do their research. I really think that. But if as the Warrant Committee, we have more of an opportunity to ask questions and more of an opportunity to dig in, I also would love to see that so that we can be providing the greatest good to the people of the town, to the town meeting, to the select board, et cetera. And I would say if we're not going to get the budget, kind of the draft budget from Nick until December 1st-ish, if it's possible that if we're going to take the and run with it, if we could even get that started now to get some background information, to your point, about is the budget from years past, if every year we're just building on it, is that a good, accurate assessment of what we need? Can we look into that now so that when we do have this draft budget, we have a framework, and then we can build on that, looking into if there were to be a fall town meeting, that'll be about something else, but we'll be having to think about that. But then looking into the spring when we're having to vote on the budget, I have seen, you know, some sort of frustration with how the town meeting process works, where people are asking, as I said, asking questions where this is something that could have been addressed beforehand. Maybe, you know, if the warrant committee had a chance to go back to those departments and ask the questions that the people in town meeting are asking, and the people in those departments either are there or they aren't there to answer. So anyway, long story short, I agree with Jay, and I would be happy to be as involved as anybody wants me to be in that process.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And there's the spirit, right? And I think the questions asked, everyone's asking, the desire to do more than we have maybe in the past is really refreshing. And I think, you know, we're going to come back in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about committees and boards and departments and who people are going to be talking to. So I'm looking forward to getting this going. I've been here for a couple of years. I've seen, as Jay's indicated, others like the slow and the last minute rollout. We're not going to do that this year. So we're going to be more proactive. I think as a committee, I think it's the right thing to do, especially just given all we're looking at in terms of finances. So.
But I'm not disparaging previous years.
Of
I want to
course
make
not.
that clear. Okay.
No, of course not. And I think every year is different. The finances are different. I think people have been very creative and have made some intelligent decisions on balancing our budget and getting us to where we are today. But I think the common thing we hear is every 10 years or so, there's going to be a deficit if we operate that way, like, you know, the year to year, and it's time to make it up. So, and the questions regarding, do we add to departments, do we level, you know what I mean? And those are great questions and ones that we want to have here. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, as a new member of the Warrant Committee, I have lived in town for 38 years. I have always counted on the Warrant Committee to tell me what's really going on. You know, what this number really mean? Do we need that number? You know, and I've never been disappointed by the Warrant Committee. They basically, I think we stand as fact checkers, as independent auditors, if you will, of what the town is saying it's going to do and how much it needs and where it goes from there. And I think that's our job. And I think I like the conversation that's taking place because I think that really would give me great confidence that what we say is the truth as we understand it. You know? And then the voters, as well as the town meeting members, get to decide. For the last 38 years, I don't dive into the numbers. I dive into what the Warrant Committee says. You know, it's saved me a lot of time.
Prefer you set the bar much lower for us, but.
Well, Peter, thank you. You know, and I think a lot of people think that way. They look towards the Warrant Committee.
Absolutely.
You know, to you know, the good with the bad, right? And that's what it's about. And you can make the decision, but the information's out there for you to decide.
That's right.
And you know, let it fall where it may.
I think we balance out the passions. I mean, if you're the fire department, you need a new station. You need all of this stuff. This has to happen. You know? And you're close to it. You want it to happen. And, you're going to put your number out there. The school committee, anybody who's managing the budget is looking for more for what they want. And it's our job to basically say, okay, that makes sense, or maybe it doesn't. Figure it out. I know we'll do it. And I appreciate very much everybody's service. Those of you who have been here. I mean, it's day one for me, but I'm very impressed by what I see. I'm very impressed by Mr. Milano that you present. And go Milton.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. I think it's, I'm looking at a very good year as the chair. I'm very happy, and I thank you all for volunteering for this. And I know Judy, you might be the last comments.
Sort of veering off of the discussion of budgets a little bit. Earlier in the meeting, you mentioned you were going to set up a sort of a phone alert. And I'm wondering if that'll be just by text. You know, you're going to do texting. Maybe I heard wrong. I don't
No,
know.
so Judy, let me explain that. I want to make sure people are checking their emails. If those feel, if though they need like a prompting or an alert that something's going on, I'm more than happy to do some type of phone tree or a text list, but like, that's to be limited. There's like, it's not a thread to discuss the goings on in the town.
Right, so
I'm
it'll
hesitant
just
to
be,
do-
oh, by the way, everyone, don't forget, we have a meeting next Tuesday.
Basically.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any other thoughts or concerns regarding the budget, our process, or what our future holds? No one, okay. The last thing on our agenda was minutes. Now, hearing that people did not maybe receive the minutes, I want everybody to receive them because emails aren't set up. I'm going to remove this from the agenda this evening. Please take a look at them. I know new members, you can abstain. If you want to go back and look at the meetings, look at the minutes. Karen Bosworth does a marvelous job. Lori is a very close checker also with Karen, who goes back, takes notes, and then also watches the meeting. So she does a great job, but I'm going to take this off. We're going to resend them out again prior to our next meeting. If you go, I'll just take a look, and I'll put it back on the agenda. We'll take action on it then. I would like to get those meetings out before we get going so the public can see them. Big minutes are a big
Chair?
deal. Yes, Judy?
If I may,
Sure.
and we did this last year and the year before and whatever else. If you were not a member of the Warrant Committee for the dates of those meetings, you can't vote on them. So new members didn't come on board until July 9th. And all of those minutes are prior meetings to July 9th. So only returning members who were actually a part of the Warrant Committee during that time frame can vote on the minutes. It's just sort of a procedural notation here that has to be perhaps understood by all the present members.
Sure, Judy. Those new members can abstain and not vote on those minutes. And those who were present, upon your review of them, Judy, right? And then we can have the vote the next meeting. So, does that sound good, everybody? Wonderful. Okay, so I'm a motion from somebody.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Second. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, public. Appreciate you watching. Sorry.